Leafs trade talks are really starting to escalate as a brand new report from Elliot Friedman has dropped, revealing a huge Leafs trade update. We're going to break down what that report is and discuss what this means going forward as new targets have been revealed for Brad Treliving as the trade deadline inches closer and closer. But before we get into that, quick reminder, hit the subscribe button. If you're part of the 71% who aren't subscribed to the channel, make sure to hit that button. This is the place to be for daily Leafs content. And happy New Year's to everybody. It's officially 2025 and we're excited to continue to bring you the content. So if you want to keep up to date with it and hopefully keep up to date for a great Leafs season and playoff run, make sure to hit the subscribe button. But there's a lot to go over today, and we're going to start off 2025 with a new report from Elliot Friedman surrounding trades. And we had one a couple days ago. New things are starting to drop from Elliot Friedman and just other reports and rumors as well surrounding new targets and what exactly Brad Treliving's plan is. It's becoming clearer and clearer each day about what target they're looking for, specifically what type of player. And let's just start it with it right here. So Elliot Friedman's focus, he said their number one focus is a center. If they're going to spend assets on a center, they would prefer to be someone with term. He adds they've been okay with their defense after making changes in the summer and could look to add someone who fits well with Riley, but the top priority remains acquiring a center, and they would prefer someone with term. And we covered this a little bit in the video a couple of days ago, but this really, highlights even more specifically than the report we covered a few days ago. Basically, they're fine at this point with their defense, but they are 100% zeroing in on a center and specifically someone with term. We have some more, quotes from Elliot Friedman here in a minute, but I want to get your thoughts on this, Darius. We kind of covered it earlier, but now it's more clear that they're 100% locked in on a center. We would assume a third line center, but given the fact that they are looking for somebody with term, this may narrow down what their options are.
Again, before when we were covering it, it was more of just a rumor. And when you look at the Leafs lineup, you're like, okay, they do need a center. So that would be the best course of action. Now on defense, like, Elliot Friedman mentions, they might go out and get somebody who can fit with Morgan Riley, because I think the plan was for Hakanpää to maybe play with Morgan Riley come playoff time. And that's looking less and less likely by the day. So I think it's definitely a center that they're after. Now we have some more confirmation that it's somebody with term, right? They don't want to go after rentals. They want somebody who may stick around and also have some offensive and defensive upside, somebody who can play a two-way game. So to me, I think that Brad Treliving is going to be calling the 215 area code. He's going to be calling the Philadelphia Flyers, and he's going to be calling about Scott Laughton, because to me, with this new information present from Elliot Friedman, that's the guy who makes the most sense to me. You can talk about a few other guys, maybe Nick Bjugstad, but he doesn't really fit the mold of what they're looking for. So I think that all signs are pointing to Scott Laughton of the Philadelphia Flyers. We'll get into his stats and his salary, of course, but it makes the most sense. We've been looking at other options and guys who make a ton of money. You're going to have to give up more assets to retain the salary, and they may sign somewhere else in the offseason. So I think this is a guy that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and you can look at where the Leafs currently stand. The Leafs do not own the rights to a 2025 first-round pick, which was traded to the Blackhawks for Jake McCabe a couple of years ago. This would mean that they'd have to rely on either other remaining capital later in the 2025 draft in the coming years, or, of course, assets of tangible players. The other factor is cap space, and according to Puckpedia, they currently have about $663,000 available, so deal-making could get dicey. Now, they're obviously going to be sending players out, and we would assume in any trade at this point there would have to be some level of retained salary for the other team who is trading the Toronto Maple Leafs the assets. And again, the biggest thing here is the term. But if there is a rental that they really like, I'm sure they'll pivot to that too. But one of the things I've heard is that they're going to go and spend assets on a center. They would prefer it to be someone with term. Now, we've obviously been talking all season, even into last offseason when Nick Robertson requested a trade about Nick Robertson. And if you're looking at Nick Robertson as an asset, he's been playing better as of late, at least better than his brutal start to the season that he had here. But as you're looking at a guy like Scott Laughton, you mentioned it. I feel like this is setting up to become a months-long campaign of Oakville native Scott Laughton as the Leafs trade deadline acquisition here. It makes sense, and we'll dive into his stats here in a minute, but all signs are pointing to at least a player of Scott Laughton's caliber and, of course, control. And when they say not a rental and they want someone with term, he only has one more year after this season, but that still is term. You obviously get to rock with the core this season and into next year after. And who knows what's going to happen with Mitch Marner? That is still a huge question mark, and how they play with that. So having somebody under contract, especially if you're going to be giving up some of your good picks or, Nick Robertson and picks, this would be a good fit here. But I'll ask you, what do you think a package would look like? There's been a lot of rumors surrounding, again, Laughton for Nick Robertson and, some sort of pick. It won't be a first-round pick by any means, but when you're looking at trading for players with control, there is a lot more, a steeper price involved most of the time.
Well, first of all, I will say that, term has been thrown around a lot the last couple of days. And I don't know if the Leafs want term in by way of like 3 more years left or 4 more years left. I think they want flexibility. I think the best course of action is a guy like Laughton, who has one more year after this year left on his deal. So you still have a lot of flexibility and you can move off of them if you want. And in terms of the player himself, he's only 30 years old. I like his game. It's a great two-way game. He can definitely score. He's exactly what the Leafs are looking for, and I think he'd be a great piece. And he can play a heavy style as well. In terms of a trade package, Nick Robertson, right? Like this is a guy that the Philadelphia Flyers could use. If you're bringing a lot in, I don't imagine Nick Robertson sees the ice, especially in the playoffs. He probably won't factor into games. So, and we don't know what the long-term plan for Nick Robertson is either, right? He has put together a pretty good last couple weeks here, but his start wasn't great. And does he have a long-term spot on this team? I'm not sure, especially if you're bringing in a guy like Laughton, which would then move over Domi to the wing where he should be. So there's a logjam. There's a bit of a logjam. I know injuries happen, but you have Bobby McMahon kind of floating around there too on a couple of the lines. So I think Nick Robertson, maybe a pick, something like that. Maybe you can get away with a couple picks, right? Lower round picks, something like that for Scott Laughton. But I think that a lot of teams are probably going to be calling about him for the exact same reasons that the Leafs want him. There's term past this season. He's a great two-way player. And even though the Flyers are not a great team, the last couple seasons, he's put together pretty decent seasons.
And you're looking at his stats this year, very interesting. And obviously Austin Matthews there. But when you're looking at Scott Laughton, 21 points in 37 games. And that's what becomes interesting because, again, he's 30 years old. He's not aging by any means. He's on the right side of 30, 21 points in 37 games. The biggest thing here is that a lot of the guys we've been looking at, whether that's been rentals or in this case, a guy under control, has been in their mid 30s. And, whether that's Brock Nelson or obviously Evgeny Malkin, especially, Scott Laughton wouldn't cost as much as some of these other guys, but would give you especially length in the lineup. And we're talking about continuity, which is something Craig Berube has mentioned, and how the Leafs kind of need that now, especially with Austin Matthews being gone. They need to go out and get one of these guys. Now, whether that is a Scott Laughton, whether that is a rental, that's the big question mark. But Darius, he's put up some very impressive stats this season on a pretty bad Philadelphia Flyers team who, again, at this point, all signs point to them being sellers. So I think he would fit pretty well into this lineup here, which, again, is without Austin Matthews at the time here, but still a very good fit.
Another thing that Elliot Friedman reported is they want a guy who can come in and be a two-way player, but can also take the pressure off the top two guys so they can play the matchup game come playoffs, because it's looking like the Leafs are going to have home ice advantage in at least the first round of the playoffs. So you want to play that matchup game. You're going to have more opportunities to do that. Obviously, Scott Laughton, I think, is a great fit in that way. He can do exactly that. So that's definitely an option for the Maple Leafs. And it would take pressure off of John Tavares and Austin Matthews. I think he can play some matchups, that type of game, right, against top teams, other centers. He's no Phil Deneau or anything like that, but I think he can take on some responsibility in that way, and it might free up the other two guys to do their thing. So I'm in love with this option. I love this option. I think it's way better than Nick Bjugstad, who is another option, right? I think that is something they should seriously consider if they can't get Scott Laughton or if the price is too high. So I love it. Even if there's retained salary, you can make $3 million work, right? There can be some retained salary. You get him for another year. This is exactly what they're looking for.
Yeah, and one final thing before we wrap up as well from Elliot Friedman here. He said, I think they've generally been okay with their defense. They did a lot of their work in the offseason. I think now is a question of if they need to go find someone to play with Morgan Riley. Is there a stylistic fit out there that they like? But it's not their number one priority, I don't believe. I believe the number one priority has been finding a center. And, he did do his due diligence in the offseason. Obviously, he went out and got OEL, Yanni Hakanpää. There's been some discourse about OEL and how well he's been playing. It hasn't been the best season. He's on pace for the lowest amount of points since his rookie campaign. So we'll keep you up to date with everything. But again, make sure to hit the subscribe button. Happy New Year to you all. And let us know down below what your thoughts are on this report. We'll see you guys later.